Hey everybody, welcome back to Garage 36. I'm Harrison, and today I'm going to show you how I was able to transform this old deer skull that I found in the woods a couple weeks back. This thing had obviously been sitting there a while and was super faded, had some mud and mold and different things on it. So I thought it'd be cool to restore this thing back to somewhat of its original glory. So stick around and I'll show you how I was able to transform it from looking like that to this. Stay tuned and I'll show you how I did it. A couple weeks ago it was February, and this is about the time of year you'll find antler sheds from white-tailed deer here about in the woods and in food plots in different areas. It was a nice afternoon, so figured I'd go walk around, get some fresh air, and see if I could find any sheds. Came across this deer skull when I was actually walking around the woods with my grandpa. We were just checking things out and found a couple other bones that were around it, so this deer had obviously died in this area. So I had the cool idea. I was like, man, this thing is super faded. It's obviously been sitting a while. It's had stuff chew on it. There's dirt and mold all over it. I was like, it would be really cool to restore this thing back to what it used to look like years ago. So that was kind of the idea behind the build. The first step in this restoration process was getting this skull and antler set cleaned. I brought it outside to the bed of my truck, gave it a good rinse with the hose, wanted to be very soft with the amount of water pressure I was putting on this thing. It was pretty brittle in some areas, and I wanted to make sure that none of the teeth or any of the fragile bones there in the skull fell out. So I grabbed a toothbrush, and this worked really well to get in some of these tight little intricate areas and to make sure I was gentle enough by not using a big car brush or something like that. So from then on, just rinsed things off and was real careful to get all the dirt and stuff I could out for the next process. You can see after rinsing this thing down that there's a lot of green areas in the skull and in the antlers. Just some discoloration that happened over time. So this will lead you into the next step of what I did after I cleaned this, which was to get that green and some of the color off the skull. I really wanted a nice white platform to work from. This next step had to do with some saran wrap, and looking back, this was probably an unnecessary step in this case. The idea is wrapping the saran wrap with electrical tape on the base of the antlers, and when I do the soak to bleach the skull, this will keep the bleach from working up on the antlers. In this case, the antlers were already bleached and white, so this, looking back on it, was a pretty unnecessary step. But in the future, if I need to do this with a newer skull where the antlers have color, then this will work. From here, I placed the skull in the water and hydrogen peroxide solution. So the point of this was to whiten the skull to bleach it. To really do this correctly, you need to boil the water, and there's actually some different solutions that you can use to get the skull really, really white. But I wanted to keep it somewhat natural and keep some of that oldness to it. So I just did a hydrogen peroxide and water soak, and this was able to get most of the green tint off of the skull, which worked great. I didn't film the area of us pulling it out of the water, but when I pulled it out, everything looked good, so I took the saran wrap off the base of the antlers and let the thing dry for a day or two just to make sure that it was good. I wanted to repair where the squirrels had chewed up the tips of these antlers, so I grabbed a wood filler, gave it a good mixing, and really just went to town kind of reshaping these antlers. There were some dry areas where the sun had cracked these things, and they had obviously been sitting there a while. So this wood putty did a really good job of filling in some of those gaps and restoring some of the wear that had been on this. I grabbed some 200 grit sandpaper here, which worked pretty well. It took a little bit of effort to get this thing roughed down, but with any sanding job, it takes some time to get things how you want, and rushing it doesn't help. So went to town reshaping these antlers how I wanted to with the sandpaper, and everything shaped out really well. As you can see here on the left tine, it really did a good job. So took to the right one and just spent some time reshaping these things back to how they originally looked. After sanding, I wet a paper towel and really just wiped these things down very diligently and got all the dust and any of the old wood putty or antler material that was still on there, and got them prepped for the paint. For the paint here, I actually used a wood stain. I did a couple test spots just to make sure I liked how the color worked, and then really just went to work on these. This foam brush worked really well for this. And originally I had planned that I was going to use a darker stain for the base of the antlers because they're typically darker. And then I was going to get a different stain to use on the tips and the tines further up. But after working with this stain, I realized I could just carry some of that dark stain all the way to the very tips in one long stroke, and the color faded perfectly. Well, I have to say, I'm extremely pleased with how this turned out. When I found this thing, it was chewed up by squirrels or whatever was chewing on it. The antlers were completely bleached white. I mean, it looked like it had been sitting outside for 10 years, which it very well could have been. So to bring it back to somewhat of its former glory with the antlers and the color like that is really cool. So I wasn't exactly sure how some of this stuff was going to turn out. I wanted to be able to use that wood putty to cover up where the squirrels or whatever animals had been chewing on the tines and on the ends here, and it worked really well. Looking back at it now, it's hard to see where I even did some of the reshaping. And then once I covered it in stain, it just, I mean, it really blends very well. This stain actually was stain that I just had here around the garage from a front door here at the house. So it was dark enough, and after I gave it a test spot, I was like, man, this is gonna work well. So started off dark here and then just progressively carried the color up to the tips and on the tines. Didn't wanna make them too dark because on normal antlers up here sometimes can be almost white, like really light or just a light tan. So did really well here. I actually matched it up to a couple sheds I have, and it's pretty spot on. So this was part one of a two-part video. This part one was gonna be just mostly on restoring this, and part two is going to be what I plan to do with this. So got a cool idea of what to do with this thing, and it might be some type of house or garage decor, so gonna be really neat. So stick around and watch part two when it comes out, and as always, thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and like this video if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.